Good evening, everybody. First of all, Hanukkah Sameach. We hope that you've had an enjoyable Hanukkah and a meaningful Hanukkah. And we're going to pick up this evening with the second part of the transformation of Yehuda. As you recall, last week, I painted a pretty grim and unflattering picture of Yehuda. Yehuda was a person who was, to say the least, self-absorbed. It's evident not by what I would like to read, but by the way the psukim themselves portray Yehuda's entire demeanor and the way he conducted himself, especially with Yosef. We see. I'm just going to review for a moment so that we can see a certain continuity from last week, and hopefully we will then conclude this week. Yosef is, for some inexplicable reason, the Malbim says, sent actually at the directive of Hashem himself by his own father Yaakov into an extraordinarily dangerous situation. Yosef approaches his brothers, and they now plot to wreak vengeance upon him for what they consider to be his behavior, which was, to say the least, unbrotherly. Now, at first they decide that they perhaps want to kill him. Reuven saves him by having him put into a pit, and then we have our first introduction to Yehuda. And Yehuda says, "Vayomer Yehuda elechav ma betza ki naharog et achinu v'chisinu et damo." What? Now Rashi says mammon. Betza is mammon, and as I mentioned last week, the Mitzudat David and others, not on this place, but in other places, they refer to the term betza as chemdat hamamon, the love of material things. So Yehuda appeals to his brothers not to kill him. Now, on the one hand, of course, one could make the argument he was appealing to have the Yosef's fate being at least revised to a life, instead of death, to a life of perhaps enslavement, because the Ishmaelim were coming along the way, and they, of course, traded not only in spices, but they traded in people as well. And so he says, there's no profit motive in this. Let's sell him to the Ishmaelim. The Yadenu, note the word here again, the Yadenu, and our hands, al tibo, our hands will be clean. We've taken care of what we have to take care of. Now, of course, Chazal tell us that they constituted a Sanhedrin, etc. And while that is, of course, a view which we have to deeply respect, here I'd like to offer another alternative to this. And it doesn't have to be that they weren't a Sanhedrin, but I don't want to stress that right now. So Yosef approaches, and he's pulled out of the pit. The coat, the Ketonet HaPasim, is stripped from him, and the brothers then devise the plot to sell him to the Ishmaelim, and then to bring the coat, which has goat's blood on it, to their father. And they in fact do that. Whether they brought it themselves or whether they sent it through others is for another time. But in Pasuk Lamed Gimel, Perek Lamed Zayin, Pasuk Lamed Gimel, the coat is presented to him. And they actually, it would be Pasuk Lamed Bet rather than Lamed Gimel. They brought it to their father, Vayomru. Listen carefully, please, to the way they constitute the interrogation. Vayomru, haketonet hakerna. Look, please, identify now. Haketonet bincha hi imlo. The phrase is so cold, so uncaring. Hakerna, as if they were an inspector, police inspector, saying, well, we have evidence here. Tell us, do you identify this? And then it's enough that they say, Hakerna ketonet binchahi. First of all, bincha, your son, not our brother, not Yosef, your son. And then, imlo. Is it or is it not? That's the question. a certain cold, calculating form of presentation. And then a key word comes. The Torah says in Pasuk Lamed Gimel, Vayakira, with a mapik in the hay, meaning to say he recognized it. He recognized the coat. Now, the pronoun it here means that the only thing that he could see in front of him was the coat. He became obsessed with the coat. It was the very coat that he gave to Yosef, and it could be that he now saw that it might have been that coat which brought Yosef his downfall. But the Torah says clearly here, note, Vayakira. He recognized it. And then, of course, everybody tried to comfort him. And later on, the pasuk says, "Vayakumu kol banav v'chol benotav lenachamo." Everybody got up. Abba, you have nechama. We'll give you nechama. You have other children. Everything is good. And then the Torah tells us, "Vayima'en leitnachem." He refused comfort. It's not even that he couldn't have been comforted. He refused it. Any thought of comfort was completely repelled by Yaakov. And then, of course, the Torah tells us in the next psukim, Yosef was sold through various hands till he got to Mitzrayim. And then, of course, the standard question is, well, okay, now tell us what happened in Mitzrayim now. We're interrupted with Yehuda and Tamar. And so we're going to see here, our question is, why is it placed here? I believe that Perek Lamed Zayin, Perek Lamed Chet, is essential for us to understand the entire story of Yosef and his brothers. But it interrupts and it says that Vayar Sham Yuda Vayered Mechav. He left everybody. Yehuda at this point in his life was completely self-absorbed. And as we mentioned last week, the Medrash says that Yosef was asuk. Yosef was overwhelmed with his own grief. Yaakov was asuk. The brothers were asukim. They were all taken, engaged, but not engaged, but rather overwhelmed, asukim. And Yehuda said, I think it's time to get married. Everybody, the family is grieving. He decides it's time to get married. And then, as we mentioned last week in the beautiful Medrash, who says that everybody was asuk, asuk, asuk. Everyone, it's in the passive form. Everyone is being acted upon. Ma'asa kadosh baruch hu haya osek. Moving the vav from the third letter to the second makes the great theological statement: only God is active. The rest of us are passive, perhaps responsive, but only HaKadosh Baruch Hu is active into the creation of Orosh HaMashiach. Now, Yehuda now goes and he sees a woman there, and she sees the daughter of a man whose name was Shua. We never know her name. She's only called Bat Shua. Once again, I would submit to you that the Torah is alluding to us the idea that in a marriage, you have two people who are complete people who are thous, as Rabbi Yoshi Bar Soloveitchik uses the term I and thou, and others have used it, have used the concept of I and thou, and that's what a marriage is. But here, she's an it. She's the daughter of Shua, and so she marries first. And he has 3 sons, and then the Torah tells us in Pasuk Hey that something very strange. The 3rd son is born, whom is named Shelah. The Torah tells us Yehuda was in Ksiv when she gave birth to him. And of course, the question is, who cares? The answer is she probably cared, but he wasn't there because Yehuda was concerned with Yehuda. Now, we continue, and of course, both Er and Onan, the older sons, die, and Yehuda tells Tamar that she should wait until Shelah, the youngest, is ready to marry. And he says to her that she should go, Shvi almana beit avich, go sit. And when we're ready for you, you'll come. And then the Torah tells us, Vayirbu hayamin. There were many days passed. Vatamot bat Shua eshet Yehuda. Again, she's still bat Shua. She dies. And what does the Torah tell us? Vayinachem. Notice the stark difference between how the Torah portrays the death of Yaakov. Of course, it is a son. That's true. But what does it say? He refused. It's not even a matter of considering it. He refused. But then when it comes to the death of the woman who bore him 3 children, it says, Vayinachem. The very next word, she died, and Vayinachem Yehudi, he got over it. Okay, and now he got over it so well that, of course, he is taking care of his own business, and he sees, Tamar hears that he's going to be with the sheep, and she goes to meet him because she wants to fulfill the mitzvah, and she's tired of waiting, and so she goes. She dresses up as a harlot, and then he sees her and says, I'd like to sleep with you. Rather direct, rather forward. Now, once again, here we have a situation which in normal circumstances, it is in the normal circumstances, the act of love which is consummated is perhaps the most intense and beautiful act that can happen between 2 people who truly love each other. But look what happens. Yehuda reduces the act to a business deal. He says, I'd like to sleep with you. She says, what are you going to give me? And he tells her, Ashalach gedi izim. I'm going to send you a goat, minatzon. I guess that was worth it. That's what they did. Vatomer, and she said, not so fast. Im titein eravon ad sholchech. This is only going to happen if you give me an eravon, if you give me some security that I know you're going to pay. So then, of course, he says, what eravon? And please remember, the word eravon here is extremely important. It appears over and over again. What is an eravon? Security. Security is something which is literally in place of the valued object. That's what security is. I can take something and hold for someone else, or they'll ask me to give them something, or I'll ask to take something of theirs. Perhaps I'll take something of theirs, and they'll say, well, if you want it, that's fine, but how do I know I'm going to get it back? So I say this will be in its place, and obviously the person who is either doing the lending or the person who's involved in sale will consider this to be somewhat in lieu of the object, the object that is desired. So that's what an eravon is. So he gives it to her. And then, of course, Vayitema vayavoila vataharlo. The Torah tells us that she conceived from Yehuda. Now then time goes on, but Yehuda wants to, listen, he owes her a debt. Usually when a person pays a debt, it's because they have a sense that I owe somebody something. I have something of theirs. But Yehuda at this stage of his life still isn't there. Because if we look in Perek Lamed Chet, Pasuk Chaf, Vayishlach Yehuda et gedi izim biyad reyehu ha'adu lami. He had a good friend, Chira, and he sent this eravon, this security, the goat, all right, eravon miyado isha, lakachat eravon miyado isha, to take it that who he did not even recognize. By the way, one other thing. I mean, he has known this woman for years and years. Son number 1, son number 2, wait for son number 3. Now he has the most intimate of relationship and he still has no clue. Because she was only an object. She was an it, as Avram Yoshua Heschel would say, or Rabbi Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik would say. She was an it. She was an object to serve his purposes. Everyone, it seems, that Yehuda is Yehuda has any encounters with are objects. They are its. They are not thous. Okay, so Chira looks, can't find anybody, and he comes back and he says, I couldn't find. They said they never even saw that there's a woman here. Vayomer Yehuda hikachlo. He says, you've got to take this back to her. Why? Not that we owe it to her, but pen nihye lavuz. Maybe if we don't get back to her, we often say it means lest, but the word pen meaning lest usually I think is best interpreted as to prevent. Pen nihye lavuz, to prevent our becoming a mockery. People will make fun. I owe something. Whoever this person is going to say, I know this person, Yehuda. He doesn't pay his debts. Okay. So therefore he says, I sent it. And his big preoccupation is maybe his reputation will be lost. So now time goes by. It's approximately 3 months or so. And then people notice that Tamar is now pregnant, 3 months, whatever it is. She apparently was in a state of being a pregnancy that people could tell. They come back to Yehuda. People come back and say, and here's what they say: Zansa Tamar kalatecha. Your daughter-in-law Tamar has been unfaithful to her responsibility toward your son Shelah. Now, you would think a person who had known her for certainly over 13 years, a person who had given her her first husband, he died, second husband, said that he wanted her to stay, you would think that if he's involved with her in such an intimate act, he'd have some clue that it's Tamar or someone at least that he knows. But again, she is one more object in this stage of Yehuda's life. And now, what is his response? Hotziyuha v'tisarei. Take her out and burn her. 2 words. 2 words. That's all the Torah records of his response. Take her out and burn her. Not maybe she was violated. Let's talk to her and see if there what has come about. Something. No, nothing. Now she was being taken out, the Torah tells us. And of course, Chazal tell us that a person should rather be thrown into a kivshana eish, should be rather thrown into a fiery furnace than to speak lashon hara or in this case to embarrass another human being. Asher eilelo, she said, leish asher eilelo, to the person to whom these belong, anochi hara, I am pregnant. Vatomer, and here come the words, Vatomer, and she said, Hakirna. Where have we heard those words, Hakirna, before? Of course, Yehuda, along with his brothers, uttered those same uncaring words to Yaakov when they wanted to set up a situation that he would think Yosef is no longer alive. Vatomer, and she said, Hakirna, lemiachotemet vaptilim vahamateh ha'ela. Whom do these belong to? Who is it? Who does it belong to? Now, first of all, and now look at the next pasuk, Kavav, Vayakeri. Notice it doesn't say Vayakirein. It says Vayaker. When Yaakov Avinu, when he was confronted with the coat, all he could see in front of his eyes was the bloody coat of his son. He saw nothing else. This statement here, and that's why it says Vayakira, and that's what he recognized. He recognized nothing else. Here, in Pasuk Kaf Vav in Lamed Chet, the Torah says Vayaker Yehuda. Vayaker is, by the way, a transitive word. It demands some sort of direct object. The Torah doesn't give us a direct object. The Torah just says Yehuda recognized. What that means, I believe, is it wasn't just the chotemet and the ptil, and it wasn't the mateh. It wasn't those that he recognized. He recognized what kind of a human being he has been until this moment. This was the beginning of the transition of Yehuda from an uncaring, self-centered, uncaring human being on his way to become the great Baal Tshuva of Chumash. What does he say? Vayaker Yehuda, he recognized everything. He realized, he saw himself for what he was. Yomer, and he said, Tzadka mimeni. He said, she is more righteous than I. That's one way to read it. Tzadka mimeni. She is far more righteous. Yehuda wasn't all that righteous at that point, but tzadaka mimeni. She is far more righteous than I. Maybe people may think I'm righteous. I may have a reputation that is good, but she is the one who is the righteous one. Now, the other way to read it, Chazal tell us, is tzadaka. She's right. Mimeni. She is pregnant from me. Both of those are fine. They are also not contradictory interpretations, so they both can be absolutely functioning at the same time. This begins Yehuda's journey to become the great Baal Tshuva of Chumash. Now, we're going to pick up the story a bit later. We're going to pick up the story a bit later when Yosef, of course, becomes second in command. Then we have the years of plenty, and then the years of famine. And now the brothers, Yaakov sends the remaining brothers, from his perspective, to Mitzrayim, because they really were unable to be able to survive unless they got some sort of help. Now notice again, here we see again, Perek, it's in Perek Membet, Pasuk Zayin. Vayar, they appear now. There must have been lines. I'm sure they were socially distanced properly. Vayar Yosef et Echav vayakireh. He recognized them. Once again, cognition and recognition come into this picture. Now, by the way, one of the things should be made clear when it came to Yosef. I mean, when it came to bringing the coat to Yaakov Avinu, and when they said Hakerna, that Hakerna was to conceal the truth. When Tamar said Hakerna, when she said recognize this, it was to reveal the truth. Nothing could be more powerful than the use of the same phrase for an absolute opposite interpretation. So Vayaker Yosef et Echav, Yosef recognized his brothers, and Vehem lo hikiru. They still did not have the recognition of him that was necessary for the change. And of course, Yosef now hatches the plot. He knows who they are. They don't know who he is. And then they're sent back to Eretz Canaan with one proviso. Come back. I have your brother, Shimon, but come back, and I need you to bring the younger brother. And of course, this poses the great dilemma of Yaakov's life. How can I do that? I already lost one son from Rachel, and now I'm going to lose another son, and various different options. Reuven had his option, which was clearly rejected. But then Yehuda gets up, and he says, in Perek Mem Gimel, Pasuk Tet, Yehuda gets up and says, send him with me. Anochi e'ervenu, miyadi tevakshenu. The use of the word eravon and the use of the word hand. First, we have the word hand, miyadi. What does Yehuda say when he says, sell Yosef to Mitzrayim? He says to the brothers, v'yadeinu al tibo. Our hands should not harm him. Our hands. Here again, the hand comes in. But notice, it's now accompanied with the eravon, with the security. Anochi, he says, Abba, send him with me. I promise you. Anochi e'ervenu. I will act in his stead. I will guarantee that he will come back. Miyadi tevakshenu. From my hand, here we have again, word hand again, tevakshenu. You may seek him. In other words, to seek to have him, you may get him. Okay. And now, of course, the entire story continues to go throughout the Parsha of Miketz. And I want to take us actually into the beginning of Vayigash in the last 3 or 4 minutes that we have, because with this we will see the complete transformation of Yehuda. Yehuda makes the stirring speech, mentioning his father's name several times to Yosef, whom he thinks is second to Paro, which he is, but who he thinks is not at all related to him. He talks to him as one father for another father, and Yosef listens patiently. And then he says, if Binyamin does not come back, because as you recall, the Yosef's plot was to put his royal gevia, his cup, in the bag, the food bag, and then of course the stage is set. Will the brothers stand up for Binyamin or won't they? He's the second son of Rachel. Will they care, or will they more or less be the same as they were before? So Yehuda makes the stirring speech, and he says in Perek Mem, in Perek Mem Daled, Pasuk Lamed Bet. Here's what he says. Well, actually, do one pasuk earlier, Lamed Aleph. V'haya, he says, now, what happens if we come back without Binyamin? V'haya kiroto ki ein anar v'meit. When Yaakov Avinu sees that we won't have this young lad, he wasn't so young, but again, he uses his words very carefully, because to the father, you can be 40 and you're 50, 60, and your father sees you as you were when you were young. V'horidu avodecha, then that means I and my brothers, that would be Avadecha, et Sevat Avdecha Avinu, then in his old age, he will go down biyagon, in grief, She'ola, to the grave. Now comes the next 3 psukim. Ki Avdecha Arav et Anar. Avdecha here means your servant has guaranteed this young boy. There we have a Ravon again. And look who plays the role in it. Tamar. Without that, we don't know what Yehuda would ever have done. I guaranteed him. Lemor. If I do not bring him back to you, then I will have sinned to my father for the rest of my life. Now, I just want to talk for a second about Robert Louis Stevenson in his book Jekyll and Hyde, which talks about evil within people, and can people reach a point of no return if they do enough which is wrong, if they keep going back to the elixir to make him Dr. Hyde, to Mr. Hyde, who, as you know, was the villain. Dr. Jekyll, the very same person, was his persona and personality was among the most revered of the doctors. So now Jekyll now becomes Hyde, and he had killed a person as Hyde, and now the police are coming down upon him. They're encircling him. They're going to get him, and Stevenson puts the words in Hyde's mouth. At this point, when they're now out to get me, he says, I no longer feared the gallows. It was the horror of being Hyde that racked me. People can change for all kinds of reasons. They can say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done this. They're sorry that they got caught. But that, by the way, that expression that Stevenson uses is the essence of tshuva. It's not the punishment, says Hyde. I no longer feared the gallows anymore. Whatever comes to me is deserved. But it's the horror of becoming Hyde again, being a person who brings such grief to people. That's what Yehuda, many centuries before, said. He says, "Im lo avienu elecha, if I don't return him to v'chatati la'avi kol hayamim." It's not that I'll feel bad, but I promised. But I know that I will be forever the source of my father's grief. Yehuda now learns empathy. He understands. And then he says, here comes the most powerful of his propositions. Ve'ata, and now, Yeshev na avdecha tachat hanar. Take me in place of the boy. Eved ladoni. If you want to make an Eved here, it shouldn't be the brothers and it shouldn't be Binyamin. I'm the one. So Yehuda is now has been transformed from being a person who thought of no one else. Everyone else was an object for him. Now he comes to the great, most moral and ethical conclusion: I would rather live a life of servitude and slavery and enslavement than to betray my father again and to betray this young boy, Binyamin. So therefore, he says, Ki ech v'anar inenu, if I don't go back, pen erevara, that I should, God forbid, never see the bad, the evil, asher yitzat, that will have found my father. And of course, Yosef is now very much aware of Yehuda's transition, of his transformation from total self-absorption to the total will to give himself up for the welfare of an innocent being. This is the story of Yehuda's transformation. This is the story of the great Baal Tshuva. The Kadosh Baruch Hu doesn't need my endorsement, but so beautifully portrayed over all of these chapters that we see how everything in itself falls in line. So next week, Miketz Hashem, we'll pick up with the next Parsha, but that concludes it for this evening. I want to again wish everybody Chanukah Sameach, joyful and meaningful Chanukah.
Thank you.